On the category of you can't make this stuff up, in the Inflation Reduction Act again, there was a lot to do about drug pricing and saying we're now going to control drug pricing. Well, here's what also has occurred with that. 4 drug manufacturers have now pulled new cancer drugs from the American market just in the last 6 months. 4 new cancer drugs have been pulled because they're saying they can't make it work with the new Inflation Reduction Act law. If I want to stack on top of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a huge section on green energy within the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really what the act really was the new Green New Deal bill. There's a huge section all about how we're going to do more energy production, more battery production for electric batteries. The future of green energy is going to be in America, and as the president said over and over again, it's going to be made in America. In fact, I sat in on the President's State of the Union address, and this is what the President said during the State of the Union address. The President said, and I quote, "Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. So when we do these projects, and again, I get criticized about this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We are going to buy American. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy American has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it, but not anymore." That's what the president said down the hall at the State of the Union address. What's happened in the last 3 weeks? The president's team has actually worked with Japan to create a false free trade agreement because there's an exception in the Inflation Reduction Act that if you want to do green energy production, you have to do it in North America or you have to be a free trade agreement. We don't have that FTA with Japan, so they're creating a type of FTA with Japan so Japan can sell us batteries. So much for the previous administrations are the ones that tried to work around that. I'd love to say it's isolated, but they just did the same thing with Germany to create a workaround in the Inflation Reduction Act's Made in America Act, so that the Made in America Act and Produced in America Act will now also include Japan in their production, will now also include Germany in their production. And may I just say to you, one of the largest new North American battery manufacturers for EV just got moved to Canada, not the United States. So much for past administrations have fought to get around it, but not anymore. This administration is working around the Made in America, Buy American Act right now for green energy. Where do they get their supplies and their critical minerals? It's not from the U.S. It's from China. And the energy environment, well, I'm still talking through that as well. The Willow Project's been talked about greatly with Alaska in saying that they're now, ConocoPhillips is going to be able to produce off 3 platforms more oil coming from Alaska. Good, by the way. We have a steady supply of oil that can come for a very long time from Alaska, and it's been blocked off over and over and over again when the law states that property is set aside for energy production. But in the process, the Biden administration not only allowed 3 platforms to start producing oil, but then they blocked off 3 million new acres from production. 3 million. I was recently in the United Arab Emirates for a set of meetings in the Middle East, dealing with the Abraham Accords. And it was interesting when I'm traveling around that absolutely beautiful country and to see the wealth that's there. I couldn't help but think, this is what Alaska would look like if the federal government would actually allow energy production there, like there's energy production in the UAE. But our nation won't allow that. Instead, we're still buying from other nations rather than allowing full production in our own. You can't make this stuff up. If you talk to a developer right now, they will tell you it's very hard to develop new neighborhoods and new locations because they can't get transformers. Those little boxes that sit on the edges of neighborhoods, some of those are the transformers that are up high. Those transformers have a 99.55% efficiency. 99.55% efficiency. I wish I had that layer of efficiency. But the Biden administration just put out new rules for those transformers that are very hard to get right now because they're back-ordered, to add a 0.1% new energy efficiency requirement on them. Remember, they're already 99.55% efficient. They want them to be 99.65% efficient. So they're moving at just that little decimal right there. To do that, it's going to slow down production again of the transformers, could be up to 16 months slower, and it will increase the cost by hundreds of millions of dollars. So when your electricity bill goes up and they're not able to continue building an expansion, that is not the fault of your electric company, that's the fault of your federal government right now, so they can brag about increasing production by 0.1% in something that's already 99.55% efficient. Put this on top of the Biden administration's new exploration to be able to cut off gas stoves, which they initially announced from 2 different agencies they're going to try to end gas stoves in America, and then quickly pulled that back and only said, oh no, we're just going to study gas stoves in America, and we're going to look at trying to be able to shut those off in the future, but we're not going to do that right now leading up to the election. Because there's millions and millions of people that use gas stoves, which, by the way, have been studied for years across the country. This is not an issue about particulates in the House. This is an issue about an administration that doesn't care about the cost to the consumer as long as they can say they got their way. It's the same exact issue on the EPA's heavy-duty electric vehicle emissions rule. That rule is rightly being addressed by my colleague from Nebraska, who's going after a very simple thing that the EPA is trying to be able to do in this Biden administration that will raise the cost of trucks up to $8,000 per vehicle. Listen, there's a lot of long-haul folks that cannot afford $8,000 per vehicle just to be able to do a new Biden administration policy. Listen, I put all these things together because as I read the news and as I go through the different things that I go through on a daily basis and be able to read through things, at some point I look at it and I think, who says this makes sense? Where are these things coming from? And if I pull any one of these out and put them in front of the vast majority of people in Oklahoma and say, is this the direction the country needs to go? They would say no. This Senate needs to talk about the direction the nation's going. We need to put controls around it, around agencies, that they just can't make up the rules based on their own preferences. This is not just an issue for our consumers. This body had a wake-up call this weekend when we watched China broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the United States State Department was not at the table because our foreign policy is collapsing around the world. That is a threat to American national security, and it's not just an absence of American policy making a difference. It's an absence of our American values. When China's values are on the move worldwide, that is not a safer world that we're living in. We need to shift the direction this is going, and it needs to be soon.